now going to build the recursive query of this query that we created in 20A. I'm going to start by copying this code, and I'm going to paste that into here. The first thing we need to do is add the word recursive. And then instead of managers, what I'm going to be pulling here all the subordinates. I'm going to call this whole thing subordinate. I'm only creating one name actually, so I'm going to do subordinates as. And then this piece is going to have two select statements. Remember, it was one select statement. That was the non-recursive piece. And then it was union, and then the second select statement that was the recursive piece. If you don't remember this, go ahead and go back up in the code and look at the general syntax above. So what is our initial result set that we're going to be working with? And that is this whole Megan Berry. So I'm pulling only that row, and then that's what we're going to be feeding into our recursive query. And instead of having these separate views, I'm going to union these together. So again, this is all part of that general syntax for how to structure this. Okay, and then what I need to do is I need to have this recursive piece. And the recursive piece was these two that I just copied and pasted into each other. So that's quite easy. I'm just going to keep these the way they are, almost at least. So let's see. And I don't need anything more here. And I close that out, and then I'm going to have my final select statement, but I'll work on that in just a little bit. So now we're selecting the initial result set, which is Megan Berry in this example, and then we're selecting the recursive piece. The recursive piece, importantly though, should reference the whole recursive query itself. So I need to include the subordinates word in here. So instead of joining with manager, I'm going to be joining with subordinate, and otherwise this is going to stay the same. All right, and then finally I need to select this entire thing and I need to run it, but I did close it out there. And then what I'm selecting is everything, and I'm selecting it from subordinates. So I'm selecting this entire thing and running that. And that should be all we need to do here. So let's go ahead and run this and see if it works. So now we're getting the same results that we had before, but with quite a bit of less code. And importantly, this can have an arbitrary number of levels and it will still work. It will just go down to the level where that then eventually has no level underneath it, and it will stop executing. But let's take a look at this a little bit closer so we understand this. So in the first iteration, right here, when I'm running this is the first thing that runs. I'm going to simply select Megan Berry because I'm saying employee ID is equal to 1. So this is my R0, my initial result set, my base result set. Then this is fed in to right here. So that is now that row right there. So here I'm saying, okay, from this row, take the employee ID. So take number 2 and then join that with the manager ID, this column in employee. So now I'm looking at that bigger table that has all my employees, and I'm looking in the manager column and finding all the employees that have manager 2. So I'm finding these 4 people. So my second result set, my R1, is these 4 rows. Then I'm taking these 4 rows and I'm now feeding those 4 rows into this recursive select statement again. So subordinates is now these 4 rows. I'm going to take the employee IDs, so 6, 7, 8, and 9, and I'm going to look for them in the manager ID column of the employees table. So my bigger table that has more rows, I'm going to look for 6, 7, 8, and 9 in those rows, and I'm going to find that these 4 rows have 7 and 8 in them. So there's no employees with 6 and 9 in them. And then finally, my final result set is going to be generating this. This result set is then passed into this recursive query again. So subordinates is now these 4 rows. I again take the employee IDs of these. I'm taking 16, 17, 18, and 19. And I'm looking at my larger employee table with all the rows. So I'm looking for 16, 17, 18, and 19 in the manager ID column of my larger table. And there are no employees with that manager ID. So these 4 individuals are not managers of anyone. So that returns an empty result set, which then tells the recursive query to stop executing. And then finally, I'm simply calling this recursive query to make sure it runs, to make sure it generates the result. And that's it.